The warm Wyoming sun beat down on Willa Danvers like a judgment from above as she stood frozen on the church steps, the white lace of her wedding dress shimmering in the harsh light. Her eyes, fixed on the dusty road that led into Promise Creek, searched desperately for any sign of the man who had promised to meet her at the altar. But Joshua Morgan was nowhere to be seen, and the whispers behind her were growing louder with each passing minute. It was June 17th, 1878, and Willa was being stood up at her own wedding. "He ain't coming, is he?" someone murmured from the gathered crowd, and Willa felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Her hands, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers, trembled visibly. Sheriff Thompson cleared his throat awkwardly. "Miss Danvers, perhaps we should—" "Wait," Willa insisted, her voice cracking. "Just a little longer." But the minutes stretched on, and the pitying glances from the townsfolk became unbearable. Willa had built a respectable life for herself as Promise Creek's schoolteacher after arriving from Boston 3 years prior. Now, that respectability was crumbling before her eyes. Pastor Miller approached her gently. "My child, I think we should—" The sound of hoofbeats interrupted him. For one wild, hopeful moment, Willa thought Joshua had arrived, but the rider who came into view was not her fiancé. Instead, it was a tall stranger on a chestnut mare, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He dismounted with fluid grace, and as he approached the church, Willa noticed the worn leather holster at his hip and the trail dust that covered his clothing. A cowboy. Probably just passing through. He paused at the bottom of the steps, looking up at the gathering. His eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin, found Willa's. "Pardon my intrusion," he said, his voice low and gentle. "Seems I've stumbled onto a wedding." "Not anymore," someone muttered. The cowboy's gaze never left Willa's face. He climbed the steps slowly, stopping just below her. "Is everything all right, madam?" Willa opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The humiliation was too great. Mrs. Winters, the town busybody, didn't hesitate to fill the silence. Her groom never showed. Left her standing here like a fool for the past hour. The cowboy's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Without a word, he removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. He extended his arm to Willa. "I'll walk with you instead," he said simply. The crowd fell silent. Willa stared at the stranger's offered arm, bewildered. "Madam," he continued, his voice meant for her ears alone. "No one should have to walk away from a day like this alone." In that moment, something broke inside Willa, not her heart, which was already cracked, but the dam holding back her pride. She would not be the pitiable woman left at the altar. Taking a deep breath, she placed her gloved hand on the cowboy's arm. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson, Declan Cassidy." "Mr. Cassidy." Willa managed a small smile. "I'm Willa Danvers." With Declan at her side, Willa descended the church steps, her head held high despite the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. The crowd parted silently before them. "Where to, Miss Danvers?" he asked quietly. Willa hadn't thought that far ahead. She couldn't bear to return to the small house she'd prepared for her new married life with Joshua. The schoolhouse was closed for summer, and going to her boarding house would mean facing her landlady's questions. I don't know," she admitted. Declan nodded as if this was a perfectly reasonable answer. "There's a cafe at the end of the street. Might I suggest some coffee while you decide?" It was wildly improper to go anywhere with a strange man, especially on what was supposed to be her wedding day. But propriety seemed a hollow concern now. Willa nodded. As they walked down the main street of Promise Creek, the whispers followed them. Willa kept her eyes forward, ignoring the stares. When they reached Maggie's cafe, Declan opened the door for her. The cafe fell silent as they entered. Maggie herself came forward, her kind face creased with concern. "Oh, Willa, honey." 2 coffees, please, Declan intervened smoothly, guiding Willa to a corner table away from the windows. When they were seated, Willa finally let herself look at her unexpected rescuer. He was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble, and those remarkable blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Why did you do that, Mr. Cassidy?" Declan shrugged one shoulder. Seemed like the right thing to do. "You don't know me." "No, madam, I don't." He accepted the coffee Maggie brought and waited until she'd left before continuing. "But I know what it's like to be left standing alone." There was a story there, Willa thought, but she didn't pry. Instead, she wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, drawing comfort from its warmth. "Joshua and I were engaged for 6 months," she found herself saying. "He's a cattle buyer. We met when he came to town on business. He seemed so steady." "Men who seem steady sometimes aren't," Declan observed. Willa sipped her coffee. "Where are you headed, Mr. Cassidy?" "North. Got work waiting at a ranch near Sheridan." "You're just passing through then?" He nodded. "Stop for supplies. Didn't expect to attend a wedding." Despite everything, Willa felt a smile tug at her lips. "Well, technically, you didn't." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "No, I suppose not." For the next hour, they sat in the cafe, making careful conversation that steered clear of Joshua Morgan and Willa's heartbreak. Declan told her about his work as a ranch hand, moving from place to place with the seasons. Willa spoke of her teaching and her students. It was strangely easy to talk to him. When they finally left the cafe, the sun was beginning to set, painting Promise Creek in gold. "I should get you home," Declan said. Willa hesitated. "I'm staying at Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, but I don't think I can face everyone just yet." Declan studied her for a moment. "There's a spot by the creek just outside town. Peaceful. Might be a good place to gather your thoughts before facing the world again." The proper thing would be to decline, but today had already trampled propriety beyond recognition. "I'd like that," Willa said. They walked to where Declan had tethered his horse. He helped Willa up, handling her voluminous wedding dress with surprising care, then mounted behind her. The impropriety of their position wasn't lost on Willa, but she found she didn't care. The creek was indeed peaceful, the water glinting in the fading light. Declan helped Willa down and then busied himself with securing his horse, giving her a moment alone. Willa stood at the water's edge, looking at her reflection, a bride with no groom. A woman whose carefully laid plans had crumbled in an instant. "He doesn't deserve your tears," Declan said, coming to stand beside her. "I'm not crying for him," Willa replied, though it wasn't entirely true. "I'm crying for the fool I've been, for the life I thought I'd have." "You'll still have a life, Miss Danvers, just a different one than you planned." Willa looked up at him. "How do you know?" "Because you walked down those church steps with your head high. That takes courage. And courage builds lives worth living." His words touched something deep inside her. Willa reached up and removed the veil from her hair, letting it flutter to the ground. "Thank you, Mr. Cassidy, for everything today." "Declan," he said softly. "After all this, I think you can call me Declan." "Declan," she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her lips. "And I'm Willa." As the last light faded from the sky, they stood side by side watching the creek flow, two strangers brought together by a twist of fate neither could have predicted. "I should get you back," Declan said finally. "People will talk." Willa laughed bitterly. "They're already talking. What's a little more scandal?" But she knew he was right. She allowed him to help her onto his horse again, and they rode back to town in companionable silence. At Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, Declan helped her down. The lights were on inside, and Willa could see shadows moving behind the curtains. No doubt the entire house was waiting to hear her story. "Will you be all right?" Declan asked. Willa smoothed her rumpled wedding dress. I'll have to be, won't I? Declan hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. He tore out a page and scribbled something on it. "This is where I'll be in Sheridan," he said, handing her the paper. "If you ever need anything." Willa took it, their fingers brushing. "You're leaving tomorrow?" He nodded. "At first light." "Then I suppose this is goodbye, Declan Cassidy." "Goodbye, Willa Danvers. I hope life brings you better days ahead." Impulsively, Willa leaned forward and kissed his cheek. "Thank you for being my rescuer today." Before he could respond, she turned and hurried into the boarding house, not looking back. If she had, she might have seen Declan touch his cheek where her lips had been, a thoughtful expression on his face. Inside, Mrs. Prey, Fletcher, and the other boarders were waiting, just as Willa had expected. Their questions came in a flood, but Willa raised a hand to stop them. "I'm very tired," she said firmly. "I'll answer your questions tomorrow." Ignoring their protests, she climbed the stairs to her room. Once inside, she carefully removed her wedding dress, folding it away in a trunk where she wouldn't have to look at it. Then, sitting on her bed in her undergarments, she unfolded the piece of paper Declan had given her. "Broken Spoke Ranch, Sheridan," it read, followed by his name in a bold, slanted hand. Willa traced the letters with her finger, wondering why the thought of a stranger leaving town should feel like yet another loss on this day of abandonments. Morning came too quickly, bright sunlight streaming through Willa's window. She had slept fitfully, dreams of Joshua leaving her at the altar giving way to images of a blue-eyed cowboy riding away. When she finally rose and dressed, she could hear the household already stirring downstairs. Mrs. Fletcher was waiting in the dining room, concern etched on her kind face. "Oh, Willa dear, what a terrible thing to happen." Willa accepted a cup of coffee with a wan smile. "Yes, it was." "And who was that man? The one who brought you home?" "Just a traveler passing through. He was kind enough to help me through a difficult moment." Mrs. Fletcher leaned closer. "They're saying in town that Joshua Morgan left a note at the saloon last night. Said he couldn't go through with the wedding because he has a wife in Montana." The coffee cup froze halfway to Willa's lips. "A wife?" "And 2 children, apparently. He's been living a double life for years, moving between territories." The shock hit Willa like a physical blow. Not only had Joshua abandoned her, but he'd been lying to her their entire relationship. Shame and anger churned inside her. "I need some air," she said, setting down her untouched coffee. Outside, Promise Creek was already bustling with morning activity. Willa walked quickly, not making eye contact with anyone. Her feet carried her without conscious direction, and she found herself at the general store where the stage stopped for passengers heading north. Inside, Mr. Parker was arranging goods on a shelf. He turned when the bell above the door jingled. "Miss Danvers," he said awkwardly. "I'm terribly sorry about—" "Is the stage to Sheridan running today?" Willa interrupted. Mr. Parker blinked in surprise. "Why, yes. It leaves in about an hour." "But surely you're not—" "I'd like a ticket, please." "Miss Danvers, if you're thinking of going after that scoundrel—" "I'm not," Willa said firmly. "I'm going for myself." 20 minutes later, Willa returned to Mrs. Fletcher's with a stage ticket in her pocket. She packed quickly, taking only what she could carry in one valise. She wrote a brief note explaining that she needed time away from Promise Creek and would send word once she was settled. As the stage pulled away from town, Willa didn't look back. She had no idea what awaited her in Sheridan, or if Declan Cassidy would even be pleased to see her. But for the first time since she'd stood abandoned on those church steps, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. The journey to Sheridan took 2 days, with overnight stops at way stations that offered little more than a hard bed and bland food. Willa kept to herself, deflecting questions from curious fellow travelers with polite but firm responses. By the time the stage rolled into Sheridan on the afternoon of the third day, she was dusty, tired, and beginning to question her impulsive decision. Sheridan was larger than Promise Creek, a growing town that served the surrounding ranches and mines. Willa stepped down from the stage, valise in hand, and looked around uncertainly. The Broken Spoke Ranch could be anywhere in the surrounding countryside. A young boy was lounging against a hitching post nearby, whittling a stick. "Excuse me." Willa approached him. "Could you tell me where to find the Broken Spoke Ranch?" The boy looked up, assessing her with curious eyes. "Sure, it's about 5 miles north of town, Mr. Harrison's place." "Is there a way to get there? A local stage, perhaps?" The boy grinned. "Not unless you want to wait until Friday when the supply wagon heads that way. Folks usually ride or drive themselves out." Willa's heart sank. She hadn't considered how she would reach the ranch once she arrived in Sheridan. "There's a livery stable that rents horses and wagons," the boy offered, seeing her distress. "Just down the street there." "Thank you," Willa said, picking up her valise. At the livery, an older man with a limp introduced himself as Elijah Cooper. "A wagon to the Broken Spoke?" he repeated when she made her request. "I can arrange that, but it'll cost you $2. And if you want me to drive you, that's another $1." It was steep, but Willa had brought all her savings. "That would be fine, Mr. Cooper." "Got business at the Spoke, do you?" he asked as he hitched a horse to a small wagon. "I'm looking for someone who works there, Declan Cassidy." Elijah's bushy eyebrows rose. "Dec. He just started there a couple days back. You family?" "A friend," Willa said, not knowing how else to describe her relationship with Declan. Elijah didn't press further. He helped Willa onto the wagon seat, and soon they were rattling out of town, heading north. The countryside was beautiful, with rolling hills covered in prairie grass and wildflowers. In the distance, the Bighorn Mountains rose against the sky. "That's the Spoke," Elijah said eventually, pointing to a collection of buildings in a valley below them. A large barn, a main house, several outbuildings, and corrals filled with horses came into view as they descended. Willa's stomach knotted with anxiety. What would she say to Declan? What if he thought she was pursuing him romantically? What if he didn't remember her at all? As they pulled into the ranch yard, a tall man emerged from the barn. It wasn't Declan, but an older gentleman with silver at his temples and a stern expression. "Elijah," he greeted. "Didn't know you were coming out today." "Brought a visitor for one of your hands, Mr. Harrison. This here's Miss—" He paused, realizing he'd never asked her name. "Willa Danvers," she supplied, climbing down from the wagon. "I'm looking for Declan Cassidy." Mr. Harrison studied her with interest. "Dec's out on the north pasture with the men. They won't be back until sundown." He glanced at her city clothes and valise. "You've come a fair way to see him, I take it?" "From Promise Creek, yes." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "You're the schoolteacher." Willa was startled. "Yes, but how did you—" "Dec mentioned meeting you. Said you'd had some trouble." He didn't elaborate, for which Willa was grateful. "My wife would skin me alive if I left a lady standing in the yard." "Come up to the house, Miss Danvers. You can wait for Dec there." Relief washed over Willa. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. That's very kind." Mr. Harrison turned to Elijah. "Stay for supper if you like. No sense heading back to town with sunset so close." Inside the ranch house, Willa was introduced to Mrs. Harrison, a plump, cheerful woman who immediately insisted on providing refreshments. Their daughter, Emma, a girl of about 16, regarded Willa with open curiosity. "You know Declan?" Emma asked as they sat in the parlor with tea and biscuits. "We met briefly in Promise Creek," Willa said carefully. "He's very handsome," Emma observed with a teenager's directness. "Emma," her mother chided gently. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Dec's a good worker. Knows horses better than most men I've hired." Quiet sort, though. Keeps to himself. Willa sipped her tea, wondering what Declan had told them about their meeting. Not much, it seemed, which was a relief. As the sun began to set, the sound of horses and men's voices filtered through the open windows. Mrs. Harrison rose. "That'll be the men coming in. I'll just check on supper." Willa's heart hammered in her chest. She smoothed her travel-wrinkled skirt and wished she'd had time to freshen up properly. Through the window, she could see riders dismounting, leading their horses toward the barn. She searched for Declan's familiar figure, and then he was there, tall and straight-backed, his hat pulled low. Even at a distance, she would know him anywhere. Mr. Harrison went to the door. "Dec," he called out, "got a visitor for you." Declan looked up, his expression unreadable from where Willa sat. He handed his horse's reins to another worker and strode toward the house, removing his hat as he approached. When he stepped through the door and saw Willa sitting in the parlor, he froze. Several emotions crossed his face in quick succession: surprise, confusion, and something else she couldn't name. "Miss Danvers," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Hello, Declan," she replied, her own voice steadier than she felt. Mr. Harrison looked between them. "I'll just give you folks a moment." He retreated to the kitchen, closing the door behind him. For a long moment, Declan and Willa simply looked at each other. Then Declan set his hat on a side table and stepped closer. "You're a long way from Promise Creek," he said softly. "Yes. Are you all right?" The genuine concern in his voice brought unexpected tears to Willa's eyes. She blinked them away hastily. "I couldn't stay," she said. "Not after everything. It turns out Joshua was already married, has a family in Montana." Anger flashed in Declan's eyes. "I'm sorry." "Don't be, I'm not." And to her surprise, Willa realized it was true. "But I didn't know where else to go. You gave me your direction, and I needed to start over somewhere new." Declan ran a hand through his hair, leaving it slightly tousled. "So you came to Sheridan." "I came to the only person who showed me kindness on the worst day of my life," Willa said honestly. Something in Declan's expression softened. Before he could respond, the kitchen door opened and Mrs. Harrison appeared. "Supper's ready," she announced. "Dec, you'll want to wash up. Emma, show Miss Danvers where she can freshen up as well." During the meal, conversation flowed easily around the table as the ranch hands shared stories from their day. Declan said little, but Willa caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. After the meal, Mr. Harrison invited everyone to the porch for coffee. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Eventually, the ranch hands drifted off to their bunkhouse, and the Harrisons tactfully retreated inside, leaving Declan and Willa alone on the porch. "What will you do now?" Declan asked, leaning against the porch railing. Willa wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I'm not sure. Find work, I suppose. I can teach, or work in a store. I have some savings to tide me over until I find something." "Sheridan has a school," Declan said. "I heard they're looking for a teacher for the fall term." Hope flickered in Willa's chest. "Really?" Declan nodded. "Town's growing. Lots of families moving in." "Then I'll inquire tomorrow." Willa hesitated. "I didn't come here expecting anything from you, Declan. I want you to know that." "I know," he said simply, "but I'm glad you came." Their eyes met in the lantern light, and something unspoken passed between them. "Mrs. Harrison says you can stay in their guest room tonight," Declan continued. "Tomorrow I can take you into town, help you find lodgings." "Thank you. That would be very kind." A comfortable silence fell between them. In the distance, a coyote howled, and the night breeze carried the scent of sage and prairie grass. "I kept thinking about you," Declan admitted suddenly. "After I left Promise Creek, wondering how you were doing." "I kept thinking about you, too," Willa said softly. Your kindness that day. It meant everything to me." Declan moved closer until he was standing beside her chair. "I'm not good with words, Willa. Never have been. But I'm glad fate brought you to those church steps when it did." Willa looked up at him, her heart fluttering. "So am I." For a moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he gently touched her hand where it rested on the arm of the chair. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new beginning." As Willa settled into the Harrisons' guest room that night, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since before Joshua's betrayal. She was far from home, in a strange place, with no certain future ahead of her. Yet somehow, she felt she was exactly where she was meant to be. The next morning, true to his word, Declan drove her into Sheridan in the Harrisons' wagon. The town was bustling with morning activity as they pulled up to the hotel. "I'll secure you a room," Declan said, helping her down. "Then we can inquire about the teaching position." The hotel was modest but clean, and the proprietress, Mrs. Collins, was welcoming. She showed Willa to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. "Single lady, are you?" Mrs. Collins asked, appraising Willa with kind but shrewd eyes. "Yes, madam. I hope to find work as a teacher." Mrs. Collins brightened. "Well now, that's fortunate. The school board's been looking for a qualified teacher since Miss Abernathy left to get married last spring. They've been making do with the minister's wife, but she's expecting and won't be able to continue much longer. Do you know who I should speak with?" "That would be Mr. Whitaker. He runs the mercantile and heads the school board. I can take you there myself after you're settled." When they returned downstairs, Declan was waiting in the lobby. Mrs. Collins raised an eyebrow at his presence but made no comment. "Mrs. Collins has offered to introduce me to Mr. Whitaker about the teaching position," Willa explained. "That's good news," Declan said. "I have some errands to run for Mr. Harrison. Shall I meet you for lunch afterward?" Willa nodded, pleased at the prospect. "I'd like that." Mr. Whitaker turned out to be a serious man in his 50s with a passion for education. He interviewed Willa in the back room of his mercantile, asking detailed questions about her teaching experience and methods. "We've had trouble keeping teachers," he explained. "They either get married and leave, or they can't handle the challenges of a frontier school." "I was engaged to be married," Willa said honestly. "It didn't work out. I have no plans to marry anytime soon, and I've been teaching in Promise Creek for 3 years, which is hardly less frontier than Sheridan." Mr. Whitaker smiled for the first time. "You speak your mind. I appreciate that. When can you start?" "Start? You mean you're offering me the position?" "Mrs. Collins vouches for you. You have experience. And frankly, we're desperate. The school term begins in 3 weeks. Can you be ready by then?" Joy flooded through Willa. "Yes, absolutely." The position comes with a small house behind the schoolhouse. It's basic but should serve for a single lady. Salary is $40 a month for a 9-month term. It was less than she'd made in Promise Creek, but the included housing made up for it. Willa accepted gratefully. When she met Declan for lunch at the hotel restaurant, she could barely contain her excitement. "I got the position," she exclaimed as soon as he sat down. "And there's a house included. I can move in next week once they've cleaned it." Declan's face lit up with a genuine smile, transforming his usually serious features. "That's wonderful news, Willa. I knew you'd get it. I can't believe how quickly everything's fallen into place. It feels like fate," Declan suggested quietly. Their eyes met across the table, and Willa felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "Yes," she said, "like fate." Over the next week, Willa settled into Sheridan. She met more members of the school board, ordered supplies for her classroom, and began preparing lessons. Declan rode into town whenever his duties at the ranch allowed, sometimes just for an hour to share a meal with her, other times spending the afternoon helping her clean the teacher's cottage or repair a broken shelf. The cottage was indeed small, just 2 rooms plus a lean-to kitchen, but it was snug and private. After living in boarding houses for years, Willa relished having her own space. She spent her evenings arranging her few possessions and making lists of what she'd need to acquire. 10 days after her arrival in Sheridan, Declan arrived at the cottage with a small wagon full of supplies. "Mrs. Harrison thought you might need these," he explained as he carried in a bundle of kitchen items. "She said they've been gathering dust in the storeroom." There were pots and pans, dish towels, a tea kettle, and even some preserved foods. Willa was touched by the gesture. "Please thank her for me," she said, arranging the items on her new shelves. "Everyone has been so kind." "People look after each other out here," Declan said. He hesitated, then pulled a small package from his jacket. "I brought something too." Willa unwrapped the brown paper to find a beautiful leather-bound journal. "I noticed you didn't have many books yet," Declan explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "Thought you might like something to write in. Your thoughts, or lesson plans, or whatever." Willa ran her fingers over the soft leather. It was the most thoughtful gift she'd received in a long time. "Thank you, Declan. It's perfect." He shuffled his feet, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It's nothing. It's not nothing to me." Impulsively, Willa stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek, just as she had the night they'd parted in Promise Creek. This time, Declan didn't let her step away. His hand came up to gently cup her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek. For a breathless moment they stood like that, neither moving. Then Declan lowered his head and kissed her softly on the lips. It was a brief kiss, gentle and questioning. When he pulled back, his eyes searched her face. "I've been wanting to do that since the day you arrived at the ranch," he admitted. Willa's heart fluttered wildly. "I've been hoping you would." Declan smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that transformed his face. "I should go. Mr. Harrison needs the wagon back." He paused at the door. "May I call on you tomorrow?" "Yes," Willa said without hesitation. "Yes. Please do." After he left, Willa hugged the journal to her chest, feeling a happiness she hadn't thought possible just weeks ago when she'd stood abandoned on those church steps. Life had taken an unexpected turn, but perhaps it was turning towards something better than she could have imagined. As summer gave way to fall, Willa found her footing as Sheridan's new schoolteacher. Her 27 students ranged from 6 to 16 years of age, with varying levels of previous education. Some of the ranch children could only attend sporadically when their families didn't need them for work, but Willa made special arrangements to help them keep up. Declan visited whenever he could get away from the ranch, which was typically once or twice a week. Their courtship progressed slowly and properly, with picnics by the creek, walks through town, and occasional suppers at the hotel restaurant. Sometimes he would simply sit in her kitchen and whittle while she prepared lessons, content to be in each other's company. On a crisp October afternoon, Declan arrived at the schoolhouse just as Willa was dismissing her students for the day. He waited patiently by the door as the children filed out, many of them greeting him by name. The Harrison children, Emma and young Thomas, lingered to chat before running off to where the ranch wagon waited to take them home. "You're good with them," Willa observed as she gathered her books. Declan shrugged. "Kids are easier than adults. They say what they mean." "So do you," Willa pointed out with a smile. "It's one of the things I like about you." He helped her carry her materials back to the cottage. Inside, the space had been transformed into a cozy home with curtains at the windows, a bookshelf filled with volumes both practical and frivolous, and a braided rug before the hearth. "I thought we might ride out to the bluffs this weekend," Declan said, as he built up the fire against the autumn chill. "If the weather holds, the view is something to see." "I'd like that." Willa moved around the kitchen, preparing tea. "Mrs. Harrison invited me to Sunday dinner again. She says I'm getting too thin on my own cooking. Declan chuckled. She says that to everyone, but her Sunday roast is worth the trip. As they settled at the small table with their tea, a comfortable silence fell between them. These quiet moments had become precious to Willa, a stark contrast to Joshua's constant chatter and need for attention. I've been thinking, Declan said finally, his voice carefully casual. Winter's coming. Travel between town and the ranch gets difficult with snow. Yes, I imagine it does. I won't be able to visit as often. Willa's heart sank a little. I understand. The weather. I'm not explaining this well, Declan interrupted, running a hand through his hair in a gesture Willa had come to recognize as nervousness. What I mean is, I don't want to stop seeing you because of weather or distance or anything else. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, setting it on the table between them. I know it's fast, he continued before she could speak. We've only known each other a few months, and I'm not Joshua Morgan. I don't have much to offer except hard work and a promise to be faithful until the day I die. Willa's breath caught in her throat as Declan opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small pearl set in the center. Willa Danvers, I've loved you since the moment you took my arm on those church steps with your head held high. I'll understand if you need more time, or if you can't see yourself married to a ranch hand with dirt under his fingernails, but I had to ask. Tears filled Willa's eyes. Declan Cassidy, are you proposing to me? A hint of a smile touched his lips. I'm trying to. Willa reached across the table and took his calloused hand in hers. The day we met was supposed to be my wedding day. I thought my heart was broken beyond repair. But you showed me kindness when I needed it most, and every day since then, you've shown me what a true partner should be. Is that a yes? Declan asked, hope lighting his blue eyes. Yes, Willa said firmly. Yes, I will marry you. Declan slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands gentle despite their strength. Then he leaned across the table and kissed her, a kiss full of promise and tender passion. When they parted, Willa touched the pearl on her new ring. It's beautiful. It was my mother's, Declan explained, the only thing of hers I kept after she passed. I'm honored, Willa said softly. When shall we be married? That's for you to decide. I know the school term runs through spring. Willa considered. Christmas break? The children will be out of school for 2 weeks. We could have a small ceremony and still have time for a short honeymoon, perhaps to Cheyenne? Declan's smile was radiant. Christmas it is. News of their engagement spread quickly through Sheridan. Most people were supportive, though some raised eyebrows at the schoolteacher marrying a ranch hand after such a short acquaintance. Mr. Whitaker assured Willa that her position was secure. Married female teachers were becoming more common, and as long as she continued to perform her duties well, the school board had no objections. As December approached, wedding preparations occupied what little free time Willa had between teaching and regular life. Mrs. Harrison insisted on hosting the ceremony and reception at the ranch, declaring the small church in town too drafty for a winter wedding. Besides, she added with a wink, this way, Dec won't have to worry about getting to town if there's a snowstorm. Willa had ordered a new dress from the catalog, not a traditional wedding gown, but a beautiful deep blue wool trimmed with ivory lace. She couldn't bring herself to wear white again, and somehow, it felt right to start this new chapter in something completely different from her previous wedding attire. 2 weeks before the wedding, Willa was marking papers in her classroom when a knock came at the door. School had been dismissed for the day, and she wasn't expecting Declan until tomorrow. Come in, she called, setting aside her work. The door opened to reveal a tall, well-dressed man with a familiar face that turned Willa's blood to ice. Joshua Morgan. He stepped into the classroom, removing his hat. He looked just as handsome as she remembered, but now she could see the calculation behind his charming smile. Hello, Willa, he said smoothly. You're a difficult woman to find. Willa stood, putting the desk between them. What are you doing here, Joshua? Looking for you, of course. You disappeared quite suddenly. After you left me at the altar, Willa reminded him, anger rising in her chest. After I discovered you already had a wife and children. Joshua had the grace to look slightly abashed. An unfortunate misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? You were married, Joshua. A youthful mistake, he said, waving a dismissive hand. I've taken care of it. A chill ran down Willa's spine. What does that mean? Divorce, Willa. I've divorced my wife in Montana. I'm free to marry now, legitimately, and I've come to make things right with you. Willa stared at him in disbelief. Make things right? You think you can just appear after months and pick up where we left off? I know you were hurt, Joshua said, taking a step closer. I handled things badly, but we had something special, Willa. I've missed you. And I've secured a position with a cattle company in Cheyenne, assistant manager. Good salary, nice house included. We could have the life we planned. You're insane, Willa said flatly. I don't want anything to do with you. Joshua's expression hardened. Don't be hasty. We were good together. You loved me once. I loved who I thought you were, Willa corrected. A honest, honorable man. You're none of those things. People are talking, you know, Joshua said, his tone shifting to something colder. About how quickly you took up with that cowboy after I left. Some are saying you had him waiting in the wings all along. Anger flared hot in Willa's chest. Get out. He's beneath you, Willa. A ranch hand with no prospects. Is that really who you want to tie yourself to? After everything you've worked for? Declan Cassidy is twice the man you are, Willa said, her voice shaking with fury. And yes, I am going to marry him in 2 weeks. Now get out of my classroom or I'll call the sheriff and have him remove you. Joshua's face twisted with anger. You're making a mistake. My only mistake was ever believing a word you said. Get out, Joshua, and don't come back. For a moment she thought he might refuse. Then he jammed his hat back on his head and stalked to the door. There, he turned. When he disappoints you and he will don't come looking for me. With that parting shot, he was gone. Willa sank into her chair, her legs suddenly weak. She hadn't expected to ever see Joshua again. The encounter left her shaken. Old wounds she thought had healed reopened and raw. She gathered her things and walked quickly to her cottage, locking the door behind her. The familiar space calmed her somewhat, but she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling Joshua's visit had left her with. That evening, there was another knock at her door. Willa approached cautiously, calling out, "Who is it?" Declan. Relief washed over her. She opened the door to find Declan standing there, concern evident on his face. Mr. Whitaker said Joshua Morgan was in town, asking after you, he said, without preamble. Did he find you? Willa nodded, stepping back to let him in. He came to the school. Declan's expression darkened. What did he want? To reconcile, if you can believe it. He says he's divorced his wife and wants me back. Declan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. And what did you tell him? To get out and never come back. Willa moved closer to Declan, needing his solid presence. He said terrible things. About you. About us. Declan's arms came around her, holding her close. Words from a man like that mean nothing. I know, Willa murmured against his chest. But I'm afraid he might cause trouble. Let him try, Declan said grimly. He already hurt you once. I won't let him do it again. They stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other. Finally, Willa pulled back enough to look up at Declan's face. I didn't expect to see you until tomorrow. I couldn't stay away once I heard he was here. Declan brushed a strand of hair from her face. Are you all right? I am now, she said honestly. You always seem to arrive just when I need you most. Declan smiled faintly. I'll always come when you need me, Willa. That's a promise. The next morning, Willa was preparing for school when Sheriff Taylor knocked on her door. He was a burly man with a thick mustache and kind eyes. Morning, Miss Danvers. Got a moment? Of course, Sheriff. Is something wrong? Might be, he said, shifting uncomfortably. There was an incident at the Drover's Rest last night. Your former fiancé, Morgan, got into an altercation with some locals. When I was dealing with the situation, he made some accusations. Willa's stomach knotted. What kind of accusations? He claims you stole money and jewelry from him before leaving Promise Creek. Says that's why he's really here to recover his property. That's absurd, Willa exclaimed. I took nothing but what was mine. I figured as much, Sheriff Taylor said with a nod. But I have to follow up on all complaints. Do you have any idea why he'd say such a thing? Because I refused to reconcile with him, Willa said bitterly. He came to the school yesterday, wanting me back. When I told him I was marrying Declan, he threatened to cause trouble. The sheriff sighed. Man like that, wounded pride makes him dangerous. I've asked him to leave town, but he's insisting he won't go without his property. You got anyone who can vouch for your character back in Promise Creek? Sheriff Thompson knew me well, and Pastor Miller. They can confirm I'm no thief. I'll send telegrams, Sheriff Taylor promised. In the meantime, be careful. Morgan's the type to hold a grudge. After he left, Willa hurried to the schoolhouse, her mind racing. Joshua's accusations could damage her reputation in Sheridan just as she was building a new life. And what might he do next if this attempt to discredit her failed? She had just begun the morning lessons when the classroom door opened and Mr. Whitaker entered, his expression grave. Miss Danvers, might I have a word? He asked, gesturing to the hallway. Heart sinking, Willa instructed her students to continue their reading and stepped outside. Mr. Whitaker, if this is about Joshua Morgan's accusations. It is, he confirmed. Several parents have expressed concern. They're lies, Willa said firmly. Sheriff Taylor is sending telegrams to Promise Creek to confirm my character. Joshua is doing this because I refuse to reconcile with him. Mr. Whitaker studied her face. I believe you, Miss Danvers. But perception matters in a small town, especially for a teacher. The school board will meet this afternoon to discuss the situation. It would be best if you didn't hold classes until this is resolved. Dismay washed over Willa. You're suspending me? Temporarily, Mr. Whitaker assured her, just until we can clear your name. I'll take over your classes myself for now. Willa returned to the classroom, explained to her puzzled students that Mr. Whitaker would be teaching them for a few days, and gathered her things. She left the schoolhouse with her head high, though inside she was seething with anger and hurt. Back at her cottage, she paced restlessly. Joshua had succeeded in disrupting her life once again, this time potentially threatening her livelihood and reputation. She wished Declan were here, but he was out on the range today and wouldn't be back until evening. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Half expecting it to be Joshua again, she approached cautiously. Who is it? Emma Harrison, came the reply. Willa opened the door to find Declan's employer's daughter standing there, slightly out of breath. Emma? What are you doing here? I came to warn you, Emma said urgently. That man, your former fiancé, he rode out to the ranch looking for Declan. Alarm shot through Willa. When? About an hour ago. Dad told him Declan was out with the cattle, but he rode off in that direction anyway. Dad sent one of the hands to warn Dec, but I thought you should know too. Thank you, Emma. Willa grabbed her shawl. I need to get out there. I brought Dad's buggy, Emma said. I can take you. The ride to the Broken Spoke seemed interminable, though Emma drove the horses as fast as she dared. Willa's mind conjured terrible scenarios: Joshua confronting Declan, accusations flying, perhaps even violence. They were about a mile from the ranch when they spotted two riders approaching from the opposite direction. As they drew closer, Willa recognized Declan and Mr. Harrison. "Deck!" she called out, relief flooding through her. Declan urged his horse forward, reaching the buggy ahead of his employer. His expression was a mixture of concern and barely contained anger. "Willa, are you all right? I was just coming to town to find you." "I'm fine. Emma told me Joshua went looking for you. What happened?" "Nothing happened," Mr. Harrison said as he joined them. "Morgan never found Declan. One of my men intercepted him and sent him on a wild goose chase to the south pasture while I brought Deck back to the ranch. He's been causing trouble in town," Willa explained, quickly telling them about Joshua's theft accusations and her temporary suspension. Declan's face darkened with anger. "This ends now." "What are you going to do?" Willa asked, suddenly afraid. "Talk to Sheriff Taylor. Get this settled once and for all." Declan's voice was calm but determined. "Morgan can't be allowed to destroy what we've built here." Mr. Harrison nodded in agreement. "I'll go with you. My word carries weight in Sheridan." They returned to town together, heading straight for the sheriff's office. Sheriff Taylor was at his desk, reviewing telegrams. "Good timing," he said when they entered. "Just heard back from Promise Creek. Sheriff Thompson says you're one of the most honest people he knows, Miss Danvers. And Pastor Miller sends his regards, along with his assurance that you'd never steal so much as a hairpin." Relief washed over Willa. "Thank you, Sheriff." "That's not all," Sheriff Taylor continued, holding up another telegram. "Got word from the marshal in Billings. Seems Mr. Morgan is wanted for questioning there regarding some missing funds from a cattle sale, and his divorce may not be as legal as he claims." "So he's still married?" Willa asked, stunned despite everything she knew about Joshua's character. "Appears so. His wife filed papers, but they haven't been finalized. He jumped the gun on that story." "Where is he now?" Declan asked. "Still registered at the hotel, far as I know. I was about to go have another conversation with him." "I'd like to come along," Declan said firmly. Sheriff Taylor eyed him warily. "Not if you're planning to use your fists, Cassidy." "No fists," Declan promised, "but he needs to understand that Willa has people who will stand up for her." After some discussion, they agreed that Sheriff Taylor would confront Joshua with the telegrams and give him until morning to leave town. Declan, Mr. Harrison, and Willa would wait at the sheriff's office until the matter was settled. When Sheriff Taylor returned 30 minutes later, his expression was grim. "Morgan's gone," he announced, "packed his things and checked out while we were talking. Hotel clerk said he was in a mighty hurry." "Gone?" Willa repeated. "Just like that?" "Left a note for you," Sheriff Taylor said, handing her a folded piece of paper. "I took the liberty of reading it first, to make sure it wasn't more threats." Willa unfolded the note with trembling fingers. "Willa," it read, "it seems I've overstayed my welcome. You've made your choice clear. I won't trouble you again. J.M." Short and oddly anticlimactic after all the chaos he'd caused, Willa passed the note to Declan, who read it with a frown. "You think he's really gone?" Declan asked the sheriff. "Station master confirms he bought a ticket on the eastbound train, left 20 minutes ago." Sheriff Taylor shrugged. "Man knows when he's beaten, and with the Billings marshal asking questions, he's probably eager to put some distance between himself and Wyoming territory." Willa felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "So it's over?" "Looks that way," Sheriff Taylor confirmed. "I'll wire the school board right away to clear your name, Miss Danvers. You should be back teaching by tomorrow." As they left the sheriff's office, Willa felt almost lightheaded with relief. Joshua was gone, her reputation intact, and her future with Declan secure once more. "Come on," Declan said, taking her hand. "Let's go home." "Home," Willa repeated, squeezing his fingers. "Yes, let's." The wedding was held on December 23, 1878, just as planned. The Broken Spoke's main house was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, filling the air with the scent of Christmas. A small gathering of friends, the Harrisons, Mr. Parr Whitaker and his wife, Sheriff Taylor and his family, and several of Declan's fellow ranch hands assembled in the parlor where Reverend Pearson waited to perform the ceremony. Willa wore her deep blue dress, her hair adorned with a crown of winter berries and small white flowers that Mrs. Harrison had somehow procured despite the season. She carried a bouquet of pine, holly, and dried lavender tied with ivory ribbon. As she descended the stairs, her eyes found Declan waiting for her by the hearth. He wore a new black suit with a silver brocade vest, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. When he saw her, his expression transformed with a look of such pure love and wonder that Willa's heart skipped a beat. This time, when she reached the bottom step, there was no hesitation, no fear of abandonment. Declan stepped forward and offered his arm. "I'll walk with you," he said softly, echoing the words that had changed both their lives 6 months earlier. Willa took his arm with a radiant smile. "Always." They spoke their vows before the crackling fire, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for all their days. When Reverend Pearson pronounced them husband and wife, Declan kissed her with such tenderness that several of the guests dabbed at their eyes. The celebration that followed was warm and joyful. There was a feast prepared by Mrs. Harrison, music provided by one of the ranch hands who played fiddle, and dancing that lasted well into the evening. When it was time for the newlyweds to depart, they were showered with rice and good wishes as they climbed into the waiting wagon that would take them to the train station for their honeymoon journey to Cheyenne. Their first night as husband and wife was spent in a private sleeping compartment on the train, the rhythmic clacking of the wheels on the tracks, a soothing backdrop to their whispered conversations and tender discoveries of each other. Willa had never felt so cherished, so completely loved, as she did in Declan's arms. "I never thought I could be this happy," she confessed as they lay together in the narrow berth, her head resting on his chest. "Especially not after what happened with Joshua." Declan's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Sometimes the worst days of our lives lead us to the best." Willa raised her head to look at him. "Like being stood up at the altar? Like finding a beautiful woman who needed someone to walk with her," he corrected, brushing his lips against her forehead. "I thank God every day that I rode into Promise Creek when I did." "As do I," Willa murmured, snuggling closer. "As do I." They spent 5 wonderful days in Cheyenne, staying at the elegant Inter-Ocean Hotel, attending a theatrical performance, and shopping for items for their new home. Mr. Harrison had offered them the use of a small cabin on the ranch property, previously occupied by the foreman who had recently built his own place in town. It would need some work, but it would be theirs. When they returned to Sheridan, Willa resumed her teaching duties while Declan continued his work at the ranch. In the evenings, they worked together on making the cabin comfortable, adding personal touches that transformed the simple space into a home. They fell into an easy rhythm of shared meals, quiet conversations, and peaceful nights in each other's arms. Spring brought new calves to the ranch and the end of the school term for Willa. As summer approached, she discovered she was expecting their first child, due in early winter. The news brought Declan to his knees, his hands trembling as he pressed them against her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our baby." Willa had never seen him so overcome with emotion. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said, rising to pull her into his arms. "I love you, Willa Cassidy, more than I ever thought possible." Their daughter, Grace Elizabeth Cassidy, was born on a snowy December night almost exactly 1 year after their wedding. She had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, and she was adored by everyone at the Broken Spoke, especially Emma Harrison, who appointed herself honorary aunt. Over the years, the Cassidy family grew. A son, Samuel, joined them 2 years after Grace, followed by twin girls Lily and Rose 3 years later. Declan was promoted to foreman when Mr. Harrison's health began to fail, and eventually, they were able to purchase a small piece of the ranch property to call their own. Willa continued teaching until the twins were born, then turned her attention to raising their children and maintaining their growing homestead. She never regretted the path her life had taken, even on the hardest days when the Wyoming winters were brutal and the work seemed endless. On their 10th anniversary, Declan surprised her with a trip back to Promise Creek. The town had grown, but the church where they'd first met still stood. They visited it together, climbing the steps hand in hand. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Joshua had showed up that day?" Willa asked, as they stood in the spot where she'd once waited in her wedding dress. Declan shook his head. "No, because then I wouldn't have had the chance to offer my arm to the most beautiful, brave woman I'd ever seen. And I wouldn't have had the courage to take it," Willa added, leaning against his shoulder. "Life has a way of working out as it should," Declan said, pressing a kiss to her temple, "even when it doesn't seem possible at the time." As they descended the steps together, Willa thought of all the joy and love that had come from that moment of abandonment 10 years earlier. What had seemed like the end of her dreams had actually been the beginning of a far better life than she could have imagined. Sometimes, she reflected, the greatest blessings come disguised as our deepest disappointments, and sometimes, salvation arrives in the form of a dusty cowboy with kind eyes, offering his arm when we need it most. On a warm June day in 1888, exactly 10 years after they'd first met, Declan and Willa Cassidy walked away from the Promise Creek Church together, surrounded by their 4 children, secure in the knowledge that they had found their true destiny in each other's arms. And it had all begun with 7 simple words spoken by a stranger on a church step. "I'll walk with you instead."